I think the first thing that we need to examine is the history of where we are now. I'm not going to, of course, give you 5,000 years of history. I will start at the beginning of the 20th century. For 400 years, until World War I, Palestine was part of the Ottoman Empire, and Jerusalem was its administrative capital. The Balfour Declaration of 1917 set out the policy of the British government regarding the establishment in, I quote, Palestine, of a Jewish homeland. However, the declaration was basically a statement of policy from the Secretary of State to Lord Rothschild. It didn't have any legal significance as such. It is only much later that some flesh was put on that declaration. Following the defeat of the Ottoman Empire in World War I, Palestine was placed under a League of Nations mandate with the United Kingdom as the mandatory power. Jerusalem was the administrative capital, and special provision was made in the mandate for the administration of the holy places. The mandate did not confer sovereignty on either the United Kingdom or the League of Nations. Increased tension resulting from Jewish immigration meant that the UK's tenure of Palestine became increasingly unworkable, leading eventually to the UK giving up the mandate in 1947 and placing the matter in the hands of the United Nations. Now we come to General Assembly Resolution 181. This terminated the mandate and proposed the partition of Palestine into Jewish and Arab states, together with their respective boundaries. Jerusalem, however, was not included within this division. It was stated it was to be a corpus separatum under a special international regime under UN administration. Now, we all know that the partition plan was not accepted by the Arabs, and hostilities broke out. The Israelis occupied West Jerusalem, and Jordan occupied East Jerusalem. The Israeli-Jordan General Armistice Agreement effectively formulated the de facto division of the city. Various unsuccessful attempts were then made by the UN to establish an international regime for the city. In the meantime, Israel consolidated its hold on West Jerusalem. In 1948, it established the Supreme Court there. In 1949, the Knesset met there, and various ministries established their offices there. In 1950, Israel proclaimed Jerusalem the capital of Israel. In 1967, as we all know, Israel, in the conflict broke out again between the Israelis and the Arabs, and Israel occupied East Jerusalem and adopted measures to unite both parts of the city, including the enactment of a law in 1967 applying Israeli civilian law. The Resolution 2253 of the UN General Assembly declared that this validity was that this enactment was invalid. This was followed by Resolution 242 of the Security Council, which called upon Israel to withdraw from, quote, territories occupied in the recent conflict. In 1980, Israel enacted a basic law declaring the United City to be the capital of Israel. This prompted another UN General Assembly Resolution 35169E, declaring the Israeli actions null and void because they unilaterally altered the status of the city and called on all states establishing diplomatic missions to the city to withdraw them. To the date, no state has established a diplomatic mission in Jerusalem, although a number of states have established consulates there, but do not receive an exequatur from the Israeli government. Subsequent General Assembly and Security Council resolutions have condemned Israeli attempts to incorporate de facto the city and called on Israel to apply the Fourth Geneva Convention in East Jerusalem. Now, I think that I've dwelt on the current, the history of Jerusalem up to the present day, because I think one needs to have an understanding of this to understand the current legal status of Jerusalem. Prior to the mandate, sovereignty of Palestine was, as I said before, vested in the Ottoman Empire. The mandate did not confer sovereignty on the mandatory power, the UK. So sovereignty is, in essence, in abeyance. The recognition of Israel as a state in 1948 did not imply recognition of all the territory held by it, in particular West Jerusalem. Israel, however, has probably consolidated title to this territory, to the territory it held up to the 1949 armistice lines, and has de jure sovereignty over these areas, mainly because the international community has accepted that. However, it has not accepted Israel's sovereignty over any part of Jerusalem, whether it's West Jerusalem or East Jerusalem. And the reason for this is quite obvious. The Resolution 181 specifically separated Jerusalem from the territory of the two proposed Jewish and Arab states. And that is a matter which has not been settled by the UN or by the international community. Indeed, the Oslo Accords, first of all, as regards East Jerusalem, Israel remains in what is called belligerent occupation. That means that it is bound by the Fourth Geneva Convention, which, among other things, prohibits the transfer of the population of the occupying state to territories occupied by it, and prohibits the enactment of laws which have the ultimate effect of annexing the territory as part of the occupying power. The Oslo Accords, of course, did not specifically deal with the status of Jerusalem. However, they made it clear that the status of Jerusalem was one of the issues that remained to be dealt with in what were called the final status talks. And the fact that the PLO has agreed to the Oslo Accords, and Israel has too, at least indicates that both sides accept that is an issue which, the issue of Jerusalem, has not been settled. That's my view anyway. A word perhaps about the holy places. As we know, as I mentioned, the Resolution 181 of the General Assembly specifically dealt with the holy places. by the holy places, we mean those places of importance both to the three monotheistic religions, namely Judaism, Islam, and Christianity. Their status originally originated from a firman of the Ottoman Empire, which imposed a freeze on the disputes between the various Christian communities regarding the Christian holy places. And it was implicit that any change in what is called the status quo would require the consent of those communities. During the Mandate, the arrangements under the arrangements extended to the Muslim and Jewish holy sites, and Resolution 181 of the General Assembly reaffirmed existing rights, I think that was the word used, and guaranteed freedom of access and worship. By and large, the status quo has continued under Jordanian occupation, and as regards the Christian and Muslim holy places, Israel has also respected the status quo. For example, the fundamental agreement with the Holy See in 1993 and Article 9 of the Peace Treaty with Jordan of 1984 both continued what is called the status quo. So the regime applicable to the holy places perhaps has now transformed itself into a rule of international law, and it is, if one could give a domestic law analogy, it is a sort of easement or restrictive covenant on those territories, those areas of land, and has hardened perhaps into a norm of public international law. It is a restrictive covenant that, in terms of common law, runs with the land. Now, perhaps turn very briefly to some of the Israeli arguments on Jerusalem. First of all, sorry, that hasn't changed yet. First of all, there is the historical and religious argument. This is that Israel is entitled to sovereignty over Jerusalem because it was the capital of Israel from the time of King David, around 1000 BC, to the destruction of Jerusalem and the Jewish diaspora in AD 70. This, of course, takes no account of the fact that Jerusalem, apart from a brief period during the time of the Crusades, has in fact been in Arab and Ottoman hands from 70 AD until the Mandate in 1922, and it has been the administrative capital of the territory known as Palestine. Next slide. Now, historical occupation, which is by no means has been continuous, cannot form the basis for a claim in international law. However emotion there is attached to it, I think one needs to be realistic. There has to be some form of occupation, which has not been the case, or at least an occupation recognised by the international community. And still less can the profound religious significance of Jerusalem to the Jewish people form the basis for a claim for sovereignty. Another argument that the Israelis have used is that Israel annexed Jerusalem in self-defense. Well, whether or not Israel acted in self-defense when annexing West Jerusalem and subsequently East Jerusalem in 1967, self-defence cannot justify continuing holding on to a territory seized in self-defence. This is because the use of force to justify self-defence means there must be an imminent threat which must cease once that threat has ended. But in any event, holding of territory in self-defence cannot form the basis for asserting sovereignty over the territory. Another argument is that Israel has sovereignty over Jerusalem in exercise of its right of self-determination. The right of self-determination is a concept in international law, and it says that people can only exercise self-determination if there's a unit of self-determination recognised as such by the international community. Now, while those territories gained by Israel in the 1948 conflict would arguably constitute a unit of self-determination, this cannot apply to West Jerusalem, which was never accepted by the international community as part of Israel. And a fortiori, it cannot apply to East Jerusalem, since Jerusalem was never included as part of the territory of the Jewish state under Resolution 181. And the international community has not recognized Israel's sovereignty over either parts of the city. And furthermore, as I said before, East Jerusalem is still regarded as under the belligerent occupation of Israel, and belligerent occupation cannot form the basis for a claim for sovereignty. So the unit of self-determination cannot apply to those territories occupied by Israel illegally since 1967, which includes East Jerusalem, whose people are Palestinians. The population of the settlements cannot count for this purpose, since the settlements are illegal under the Fourth Geneva Convention, and this is something that has been recognised consistently by the international community. There are other Israeli arguments which I won't deal with, at least in this very short presentation. So I hope that if anyone has any questions, I'd be happy to answer them at the time when it's time to ask questions. Thank you very much.